which is wild to think about because it's the opposite of everything that you see online. If you were to research this and just look at the Washington Post, New York Times, whatever, all you're going to see is the half of the story that is less mathematically impactful to the outcome of the Electoral College, which is that smaller states have more white people, and so they have more voting power per person, and that is true. But Vermont doesn't decide the outcome of the election. It's the swing states like Pennsylvania and Florida and
Georgia.
Georgia, exactly. And those have a much higher population of minorities.
A little more, maybe.
Even more?
Just a little bit. Yeah. Is it straight?
What's up, guys? Remember when I used to do that?
Yes.
Oh, man. Welcome back to the Imagine Two People podcast. It's been a long, long time.
Yes.
Why? Explain yourself.
Yeah, we should
Anna.
give an explanation.
This is all your fault. It's not her fault. It's my fault.
Well, the last time that we recorded a podcast, we were in our old house in our old state. We used to live in the state of Maryland. In a beautiful state. We didn't love it, so we decided to move. And we thought that move was going to take a couple of years. It took a couple of months. It was very fast, and we basically had to move out of our house, live on a temporary house on a different state, and then pick up our stuff and move to Florida, where we actually are right now. So we lived in 3 different states in 2 months. That was an adventure. And then we came here on our new home, which is a beautiful home, the beautiful state of Florida, loving it. We decided to have a baby. So now I am heavily pregnant, and we are set in our home together now. And it's been, taking a little more than we thought to get used to how things are and our new house and our new routine and everything. And, to actually having another person who is about to come to live with us in the next 3 months.
The next 3 months.
Yeah, we need to push this baby out. So
right.
this is where we are in life, and we're back. We have a new studio.
We're back.
We're still putting our studio together, but this is
the first time we have the 3 cameras too.
Yes.
The multi-cam setup. Super happy about that.
Yeah, we've been working a lot. Well, you've been working a lot. You just come and tell me exactly what you bought.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. Well, we got to figure out the background thing. Like, back in JAJ days and the Josh Binder Reacts, like, it was always a bunch of different, like, K-pop stuff and then, like, a thing of the city. It was always New York City.
Yeah.
But I feel like I want to go a different direction this time. I want it to be a little more laid back because it's a podcast. We talk about ideas, And so I want to put like maybe some shelves or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We're still brainstorming on what's gonna happen, but
We'll figure it out.
yes.
But we're here just in time to talk about a lot of the trending topics right now. Recently, what was it? 2 days ago, we watched the hot mess of a election debate we saw between Kamala and Trump.
Yeah, wildly entertaining, but a mess when you think about how serious it actually is.
I was laughing my butt off, and then I was like, oh, wait, this is our country. This is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
But we're also detached, right? Like, we've seen so much insanity in the news and people calling each other names. And I'm like, is this even about policies anymore? Is it just who can get, I don't know, less hate?
Yes. Yeah, it's who is more popular, who's more likable. And usually, if you're not certain of who you're going to vote for already, then the debate, well, if you are certain for who you're going to vote for, the debates are not that serious to you. Like, we know who we're going to vote for. We're just sitting down and watching and laughing at how ridiculous it all is. But once you understand that policy or politics, it's a game, like once they're in power and they have policies, then actually it's important. But while they're trying to get elected, it's all a game. It's all them saying the right things at the right time. It doesn't really mean anything. Then you get detached. It's like, yeah, this is a show. We're watching a show.
That is unfortunately my opinion on most of politics, where it's not policy at all.
No.
It's frames. It's framing a situation and controlling and manipulating the frame. It's essentially manipulation.
It's Machiavelli. It's actually, I thought about it as soon as we finished the debate. I was in the shower. I was like, man, this is such a Machiavellian picture, which is, he defended the idea of that you as if you are the president or the king or like the sovereign, you have to look like you are good. You don't have to be good. You just have to convince people to see you in a certain light. And if you do that, you don't have to use force for many situations. So, but he was actually not for people being completely good, because you need to be able to do bad things or evil things or hard things. So you need to come off, as popular and likable. And, if people are on your side, then they like you, they will elect you, they'll be with you. You won't have revolutions in your country, etc. But, if you just have that frame and then in the back you do other things, then you're winning in life as a ruler.
It's like the theory of which president would you rather have a beer with, and the one that typically the majority of the population say they would, that's the one who typically gets elected. But and we also have the Electoral College, which is this whole thing. People think, oh, well, it doesn't make any sense why you can get the majority of the vote, but you still lose the election.
Yes.
Which is really interesting. What do you know as someone that's not originally from the U.S., someone from Brazil, what do you know of the Electoral College?
Well, I know that in the U.S., it's not a pure direct democracy as the way in my country. In my country, the last president won the election by 50% point something of the votes. And, the guy who lost was 49% something. Crazy stuff. It's just the majority of the vote. Simple as that. In the U.S., you have representatives in every state. And because the states are so independent, which is actually a very different frame system than the rest of the world, the majority of the rest of the world, then the sizes of the states give those states a number of representatives, and the representatives have a number of votes. They represent a number of votes for the actual winner. So you are not voting directly for the winner. You are voting for the person that you want to win, but the number, whoever wins on that state actually gives the votes to one of the guys, and the bigger the state is, the more representatives, the more votes they count. The smaller it is, the less votes they have. And throughout history, you have the politicians changing the shapes of the districts to manipulate how many votes they actually can have, which is something called gerrymandering. So they basically manage the shapes of, and they have very weirdly shaped areas that have a different kinds of votes, a number of votes. So they win elections without actually winning the majority of votes.
Right. Right. That's nail on the head. I mean, it's more than I know about Brazil's election system.
Yeah.
But it's wild, because if you look at it from the point where you get a certain number of electoral votes based on how many representatives you have, it's almost a 1-to-1 where you would think, well, if you get most of the electoral votes, then you have to get the most popular vote as well. But it's not true, because each state also gets, regardless of population, 2 senators. If you're a giant state like California, Texas, or Florida, you still only get 2 senators. But if you're a tiny state with 600,000 people like Vermont, you still get 2 full senators. And so that starts skewing the amount of electoral vote each individual represents. For example, Vermont, 600,000 people, very tiny state. They get 1 House representative plus 2 U.S. senators. And so they have 3 people in Congress that represent them. And that equals 3 Electoral College votes. And how many total Electoral College votes are? It's 538.
Okay.
Thank you, Jamie. I had to look that up. But if you get at least 270, that's the majority of 538, you'll win. And so only 3 of those go to Vermont. But they have 600,000 people, and so 1 Electoral College vote represents roughly 200,000 people in Vermont. That's sort of the equivalent.
Yes.
You take a very large state like Florida, for example. They have roughly 20 million people based on the U.S. Census. I mean, they're getting an insane amount of people. It's the fastest growing state.
We came here.
Yeah, we're proof of that. So they get, I want to say 30 plus 36, 37 House representatives, which again represents 600,000 people per House,
per representative,
yeah. Just like Vermont. But they also get those same 2 U.S. senators.
Yes.
And so on average, you have 1 Electoral College vote for representing about 600,000 Floridians, because the senators don't really change that ratio.
Yeah.
Whereas in Vermont, 1 Electoral College vote represents about 200 Vermontians, or whatever you want to call them.
So they count more.
They count about 3 times as much. And so what it inevitably does is the Electoral College disproportionately gives more voting power in the Electoral College outcome to smaller states.
Yeah, so before I came here, the image that I had on how the Electoral College worked in the US was that, if, for instance, in Florida, Republicans had 60% of the votes, then that meant that 60% of the representatives would go to Republicans.
In that state.
Yeah. And that's not how it works at all. Like, how it works is if they have 60%, that means that 100% of the number of representatives go to the Republicans, which is why the battleground states are so important.
Yes.
And they try to get those states to vote in a certain way because your vote counts, but it doesn't count that much because it's not a direct vote. You basically want to be on the majority side, and that's the only way that your vote is actually doing something.
It's a winner takes all per state.
Yeah.
But I think there's 2 states that don't do that, which is really odd. There's a history on this. If you're curious, look it up. But the broad brushstrokes is that I think it's Maine and Nebraska, which I'm like, try to find Nebraska on the map. It's the forgotten state. I had to look it up. It's like right in the center up north. But anyway, those are 2 states that actually do it a little differently. It's not a winner takes all. It's, I think, if, like, for example, if they had 4 Electoral College votes, they split it in half. So half of their votes, 2 votes would go towards whoever gets the majority vote.
Yeah.
And the other 2 go towards specific districts on where those individually flip, either Republican or Democrat. So I don't know the history on why they specifically decided to kind of do their own thing.
Yeah.
But 48 of the states do it the other way, where it's a winner takes all.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting system. And it always... it makes sense when you see a lot of the politicians now, you have one side saying, you have to do this for our democracy, blah, blah, blah. And then you have other people saying, like, well, no, we're not actually a democracy. We're a...
Constitutional republic.
Yes, I always forget the term. Constitutional republic. And it's so difficult to remember, but it means something. It means that, like, it's unlike my country. Every state here is so different. So giving the states a number of representatives, and those representatives come out and say, like, this is our vote, basically it's like tiny countries in a huge UN. It's as if the United States was the United Nations, and every state comes out with one vote, and every state counts. Of course, it's not one vote. It's like, 13 for some, 5 for others. But it comes out saying, like, this is what the majority of the people of our state want for the country. And that way it's like different than just saying, this is what the majority of people in the country want for the country. And it works a little different than just, voting directly, which can cause some differences between the person that gets the popular vote and the person that actually wins the election.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. This is the outcome of the Electoral College. You have a bunch of states that always go right or left. You look past the past 100 years, states like Alabama, they're a true deep red state. They're called safe states. California is a safe state for Democrats. So Hillary didn't even try to campaign once in California. She thought she had it in the bag, and she did. And she got it without trying. She spent most of her campaign money, and Trump spent most of their campaign money campaigning in Florida, because that tends to be a swing state or battleground state. They also call them purple states or whatever. It's like red and blue combined, because the winner typically wins by a very small margin, and it flips depending on what election cycle you're talking about.
Yeah.
So a whole amount of energy and financial effort gets poured into these battleground states, because these swing states, if you look at the math, they determine the outcome of the election. And that's why you hear people on TV saying, oh, don't even look at national polls. They're not important, because the swing states are the ones that decide the election.
That's why people are always talking about Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah. Huge swing state.
Pennsylvania comes up in every single debate or talk about who is going to win. And it's like, why Pennsylvania every time? But
swing state.
And, on the debate, you have, like, Kamala Harris talking about the Polish population in Pennsylvania. I was like, what?
Like, why is she catering to the Polish population? But
so
like,
random.
It's because that she was told by her campaign staff, you have to win Pennsylvania.
Yes.
If you don't win Pennsylvania, I mean, your chances chances just plummet if you don't get Pennsylvania. And she knows that, oil is a big industry. And so she's completely changed her stance. It's because she's got to win Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It's clear that she's against fracking, but she wants to be pro-fracking just enough to get the vote.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
a game,
everyone
guys.
does that. The whole thing is a game.
Yes.
You think Trump is a big Bitcoin fan? He's super old. He went to the Bitcoin conference because he wants to get the crypto vote.
Yes.
So everyone's doing this. Everyone's pandering. It's
Yeah.
just a pandering game.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. You have the safe states, you get the battleground states. And so you typically have people who are on one side or the other who either hate the Electoral College or they think it's great and it's fine and it gives better representation to various parts of the country that don't get a ton of representation because they have less population.
Yes.
And so you get this contention online. If you do research on this, which I would highly encourage you do, you're going to see a whole lot of people make arguments on both sides. But it usually boils down to just one main argument. It's saying that it's not fair that you could have a candidate like Al Gore, for example. Al Gore won the popular vote, but he didn't win the Electoral College. And you're thinking, so that doesn't jive with the will of the people. And they say in 2016, when it was Trump and Hillary won the popular vote by a few million votes, but Trump won the Electoral College.
Yes.
And they're like, well, I don't understand how this could happen. And a lot of people get upset. They say my candidate didn't win. And because those two election cycles happen to favor a Democratic candidate, there's a lot of Democrats who are against the Electoral College. I think the last Pew Research poll was like 80% of Democrats are against the Electoral College.
Really?
Yeah, whereas I think with Republicans, it's more like 40 to 30, which would make sense. They're thinking, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. Yeah, it's fine. But at the end of the day, the argument is it's not fair to the majority of Americans. But the idea of where it came from in the first place was, you got to go all the way back to the founding of the country. 1776, the Declaration of Independence is signed. We secede from Britain, and we become our own thing. You get the 13 colonies that become the 13 first states. There were some that were much bigger than others.
Yes.
And the whole idea behind it was twofold. It was they wanted to give the smaller states just as much say as some of the bigger colonies, bigger states. The other side was a compromise. They essentially had half the people that wanted the Congress themselves to directly elect the president, and the other half of the people in the Constitutional Congress, the other half wanted the people to directly vote for whoever they wanted. So they said, okay, instead of just the Congress voting or the people voting, let's have the people vote for Congress, who in turn vote for the president.
Yeah. So basically, if you are in a popular vote only system, then areas that are super populated like New York, or big cities, LA, or that represent a tiny space in the country, but a lot of people. So they are disproportionately full. They're overcrowded. And they will vote pretty similar because they live on a very similar place. They have the same interests. If you had a candidate catering only to those people, then you wouldn't have, I am making the argument of for the Electoral College, like if I'm playing the advocate here, then you wouldn't have an accurate image of the rest of the country. You only have, we're caring about these things that only these few cities in the whole country care for, when the rest of the country looks very different. Like what people in Idaho care about is very different than people in New York care about.
Right.
So mostly like if you go in like the country of the same states and to the cities of the same states. So the Electoral College works in a certain way to give the people that live in the country that might, you have to see a neighbor, you have to drive for 5 minutes, and you still count because you're part of that country, and your state might be huge, but you don't have a lot of people in there. And you have states that are tiny, but they have a lot of people in there. So if it was just a popular vote, you have a disproportionate, it's possible. A lot more possible than in the Electoral College, the way that it works in the US. It's a lot more possible to have a skewed vision of what the country is, because then you have candidates only catering to the people that, the overpopulated.
The main cities.
Basically,
like the 5 or 6 main cities in the US, they would essentially get the majority of their say in Congress.
Like Vermont would never count.
Forget it. Like, forget about moving to Vermont. Your interest will never be heard.
Yeah.
And so the Electoral College, essentially, as I understand it, it forces presidential candidates to have a broad coalition, to have a broad interest, to say, I'm not just going to represent people in Miami, LA, and New York. I'm going to represent the people in Idaho and all these other states that most people can't pick out on a map.
Yeah, like Wyoming. I didn't know that Wyoming was a state until I was living here for a solid 6 months. We were doing like a puzzle, and there was, like it was a state puzzle, and I put Wyoming. I was like, what is this? Like, how do I even say this? And I was mind blown that I've never heard in any movies, any shows, because if you're not American, the only things that you know about America is what you watch on TV. That means that I have never watched anything that mentioned Wyoming. So if you're from a state like that nobody knows, like nobody really cares, about you or your interests, or like, what is the state about? Is it farming? Is it like industry? It's like, I don't know.
Probably a lot of farming and
Right.
And the Electoral College means that they are going to have an equal representation or a disproportionately large representation.
Favorable, yeah.
And so that's where the argument comes down. They don't want smaller places to have more of an impact than bigger places.
So that's the main argument for the Electoral College. What is the main argument against it?
Well, there's a racial component. They would say, I think proponents against it, they would say that the Electoral College disproportionately favoring some of these smaller states, and these smaller states are disproportionately white. And so their white population might be between 80 and 90% with a lot of these small Midwestern states.
Yes.
Whereas the white population nationally is only 65%, I want to say, somewhere in there. And so they're saying it's giving too much vote to white people. And they kind of leave it there. And they're not entirely wrong, but that's not the whole story. And it's really important, if you're going to start looking into this data, to look at the whole picture, because that's a valid point of view. But I would say yes, and it's also giving a lot of vote to minorities in the swing states. If you look at the past 10 elections, it has always been determined by the swing states. If you win the majority of the swing states, say swing states. I can't even say
Swing states.
I'm picturing a cow like on a swing right now. Anytime you win the majority of the swing states, you win the election. That's the way it works, which is wild that it goes that way.
Yeah.
But politicians know that, and so they cater to that, and they spend almost all their campaign financing on those specific 6 states. I think it's Florida, Pennsylvania, Georgia, I want to say North Dakota or North Carolina, one of the two. Is it Arizona and maybe Nevada? If you realize that winning the swing states wins the election, you can easily see how this is not a racial issue, because in those swing states, they have a much higher population of minorities, mainly African American and Hispanic, than in the rest of the country. So, for example, according to U.S. Census Bureau data, there's roughly, I want to say 14% of African American population in the country. Whereas in these swing states, the very important swing states that determine the election, it's much higher than that on average. It's more like 20-30% in some of these swing states. And so you can look at each of the swing states, how many Electoral College votes they represent, and then what the population is of every ethnic group. And it's very obvious to see it's the swing states that have the most Electoral College votes. I think it's like 90 out of 130. They all have much higher minority populations than in the rest of the country. And so what that basically is saying is a minority vote in the Electoral College disproportionately determines the country's outcome.
Yeah.
If you were to get rid of the Electoral College and go to a popular vote system, that would significantly decrease the impact of minority votes on the Electoral College.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is wild to think about, because it's the opposite of everything that you see online. If you were to research this and just look at the Washington Post, New York Times, whatever, and you start looking at all the different Reddit feeds, all you're going to see is the half of the story that is less mathematically impactful to the outcome of the Electoral College, which is that smaller states have more white people, and so they have more voting power per person. And that is true. But Vermont doesn't decide the outcome of the election. It's the swing states like Pennsylvania and Florida and
Georgia.
Georgia, exactly. And those have a much higher population of minorities.
Yeah, well, it's always about what is going to benefit you the most, like what piece of information will benefit you the most. And I am not American, but, I've been living in this country long enough to realize that usually the party that worries the most about racial issues, or at least like they talk about it the most, is the Democrats. And they are the ones that on the past elections got the majority of the popular vote. So if you want to go to a popular vote system, that's the piece of information that you're going to use. Like, the popular vote would be more democratic. It would represent more what the country is right now. Like we no longer look like 1776. We're in 2024. Things are different, and this is what we're doing. So it's the same with statistics. One side of the aisle or the other side always uses a piece of the statistics that benefits them. And usually it's not an honest whole truth. It's just a piece of it.
Right, exactly. So hopefully this gives a little bit more of the broader picture. It blew my mind because, again, I have not seen this talked about anywhere on YouTube or on Spotify. I was Googling this specifically. No one has brought this up, and this is all easily verifiable from data from the Census Bureau and voting statistics that we get. It's so easy to look at, and it's from government sources, and yet no one's talking about how banning the Electoral College will actually suppress minority vote, and so it's racist to get rid of it. But, people are going to believe what they believe. People will do what they do.
Yeah.
But I hope that this can shine some light on the facts of the situation.
Yeah. Do you have are favorable of the Electoral College, the way that it works, or are you pro changing it, or,
What I would do, well, here's the thing. I want to preface everything that I say in terms of like, if I were president, I had the magic wand, is that I only know a small piece of the information. Every day I'm learning more things that blow my mind.
Yeah.
And I love this country so much. Even though it has flaws, I still think it's better comparable to other countries. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
That's true.
And I think some of the systems that were in place, like the Constitution, like the rule of law, like free market capitalism, some of these things, with their flaws, they created the incentive structure that created all of the wealth and the life that we're all enjoying now. And so it's like you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And so when I decide, I'd rather have something be this way in the country, I always check myself and I'm like, well, there's more that I don't know than I ever will. And so if that's true, I need to be at least humbled to think these decisions that were made, they've put us on the trajectory that has given us the wealthiest country in the world.
Yeah.
And so if you have that mindset, I think it's impossible not to be humble. But for me personally, with voting, instead of having it being first past the post, which is the way it is now. So in Florida, the candidate who gets 51% of the vote will win all of the Electoral College votes. I would have ranked choice voting, I think, or something similar. So ranked choice is saying, okay, I know, let's say, some random candidate that would never get the vote, like Ben Carson back in the election when Trump first was running.
2016.
Yeah, so Carson got very little vote, right? But he stuck around a little bit and he lost the primary. But a lot of people like Carson. They like that he was chill, he was down to earth, he was very factually based, and he wasn't like trying to be some showy person that was constantly bashing their opponents. So anyway, what if you said he was your number one candidate, but you weren't sure if he was actually going to win? And so you say, he's my number one vote, but if he doesn't win, I'll choose this other person. And if they don't win, I'll choose this other person. And so you can give priority. And then it'll just go through the rounds of voting to figure out who gets it first. I think that makes a lot of sense because then you can vote on conscience and you can vote your top choice, even if you don't think they have a good chance at winning.
That would make the system less of a so black and white, either Republican or Democrat. That would make people like Robert Kennedy more electable.
Oh, yeah. I think Robert Kennedy would have won had it not been for a two-party system.
Yeah.
And it's the two parties, both sides of the aisle, who are fighting any other third-party option.
Yes.
They're fighting ranked choice voting. They do not want ranked choice voting.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't want the popular vote or what do you call it? Approval voting too, where you have a point system where you can either give a candidate plus 10 or negative 10. And so you can give everyone, you have all choices in front of you on both sides of the aisle, and you can give them either a plus 10 or a negative 10 or anywhere in between. And so you end up adding the number of points, and then you can get your choice from there. And so that's more of a popularity points-based voting, which is really interesting too. And there's a whole history on all these different strategies, and they're not new, they're not novel. They've been going around since like the French Revolution, and before that, there was various people who were philosophers and mathematicians who came out with these ideas and talked about the pros and cons. And that's what's wild is no matter what voting system you come out with, whether it's the two-party system, ranked choice voting, popularity vote, or whatever, they all have pros and cons. Every single one of them.
Yes.
It's impossible to have a voting system that is completely fair mathematically. But I'd be sooner to change that aspect than to change the Electoral College because that's part of the foundation of the country, and I think it's partly responsible for the success and wealth of the country.
Yes. Yeah. You've seen what it gave you.
You've seen what it gave you, and even if you don't like it, you're like, okay, but I can see the results.
Yes.
And some people might say, well, it wasn't that. It was all these other things,
Yeah.
and this was just harming it, but not harming it enough.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to isolate these things. It's really hard to be like, well, what would the world have looked like if we didn't have ranked choice, or we didn't have the Electoral College, and we had a popular vote?
Yeah.
No one can say.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult to say. But yeah, so that I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It's a great answer. Yeah, I like that. And like I said, looking from not from the inside, but as an outsider, it's such a different system. And I've lived on the other side, where we do have a direct vote, a direct popular vote, and elections look a lot different than the ones in here. You do have a concentration of politicians talking to specific areas because they are more populated. So you have areas of the country that completely get overlooked. And you also have a need in my country, for instance, we need usually for presidents, 2 turns. So you vote once because there's so many people running, and you can vote for whoever you want. And then nobody gets the majority, right? Like someone gets most of the votes, but it's not the majority of the votes available. So we do like whoever is the 2 ones that get the most, they go for a second turn. And then like in a month, they will vote again for one of those 2.
Huh.
And that usually is how it goes on most main presidential and governor elections in Brazil. But it's also contributes to coalitions. So if you are like a third person, like Bob Kennedy, you just go together with one of the guys, like he just did with Trump, and because that gives you the most chance of your party actually winning something.
Right.
Then you're just like, I'll be your representative for something. I'm not going to win this, but I'll endorse you and you put me in your cabinet. So it's a lot of internal politics that it generates, like you said, pros and cons. But I think the system that the U.S. has is so unique and so, how do you say, it's a very sophisticated system because it just forces every state to have a voice and to be heard. And so you have every election, you have, like California making fun of Florida people and Florida people making fun of California for the way that the vote goes. But at the end of the day, they have to count. And you can't just separate Florida. Or
right.
You can't separate California. You have to coexist, and you force the politicians to actually listen to a part of the population that they wouldn't if they didn't have to. So I think it's the checks and balances, which is such an important concept for how the U.S. is made in every single part of this country, that if it was different, like you said, I don't think we would have the country that we have now. And it's very fragile and it's very difficult to protect. But I hope that you guys do a good job.
Yeah, Trump, if you're listening to this, and Kamala, whoever wins, do a good job. Well, I think we can stop there. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I'll put this on YouTube and Spotify like usual. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the Electoral College. Like, would you change it? If so, what would you change it to? And
We hope you learned something.
I certainly did. All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.